Right on, Gwen. That's my theme song for life right there. My name's Chris and I'm an addict. Thank God for another day of life and another day of clean. I want to thank the guys that are on the committee that put all this together. If you've ever been on a committee for a retreat or a convention, it's usually like a year-long venture, and there's a lot of heated discussions about how things are going to go. But in the end, it all culminates into this. And it's a thankless job usually. Most people don't recognize those people that are doing so much work behind the scenes. So, thank you. I want to thank Bruce. Bruce hit me up about 4 or 5 months ago and asked if I'd come to this retreat and share my little piece of NA. So I appreciate you for that. I know Kyle put you up to it. Kyle's my sponsor. And I'll share a little bit about that. I have an unusual circumstance, I think, when it comes to sponsorship. Before I get started, I'm going to read a little bit. Does anybody read the spiritual principle a day? Did you read it today? Yeah. So I read it and I was like, oh, thank you, God, because it talked about sharing the message and getting out of the way. Let the message be the messenger. Don't worry about what that person is, but stay true to the message. And that's what I've always tried to do. So I'm going to read from the love chapter for The Journey Continues. If you haven't read The Journey Continues, which I'm sure a lot of you have, it talks a lot about life as you're living clean, as you're living a spiritually principle-based life. And so I can relate a lot to it. Well, this is highlighted out of the love chapter, page 255. When we treat happiness as a spiritual principle, we can see its relationship to humility. Our ability to enjoy our lives is directly related to our willingness to let go of our self-obsession. If we think of happiness as a spiritual asset, we can see it as both a gift and a goal. We work toward it by letting go of those things we cannot see standing in its way, and leave the rest to a power greater than ourselves. Humility and empathy are essential to a rewarding spiritual life. As we find the deep joy that comes to us through our practice of compassion, we find that happiness is much more available to us. Walking through our own challenges helps us find compassion for ourselves and others. As we develop our ability to feel and express empathy, we come to realize that the same Spirit dwells in us all, and that none of us is more or less important than another. We're all sick and suffering sometimes, no matter how long we have been clean. We all bring hope and the answers sometimes even when we don't feel it in ourselves. One day clean is a miracle, whether or not it is ever followed by another. When we see a member experience a real breakthrough with 20 or 30 or more years clean, we can see that truly recovery never stops. Love is an action word. Loving action takes many forms. Sometimes it's a warm hug. Sometimes it's telling someone the cold, hard truth. But when we act from love, with the intention of loving, it shows, it matters, we can feel it. And the people around us feel it. We can enjoy it literally. It brings us into joy. When we finally trust that we can love and be loved without being hurt, we are able to tap into our connection to others in the world around us. Staying clean for a long time means not just that recovery happens, but that life happens. We grow up and grow old. We raise families, change jobs, and navigate the world just because we are alive and clean. We come to understand that happiness is an inside job, a spiritual experience that can get stronger with recovery. Love is a form of intelligence. It is the intuition that brings us to the right words when there are no words. It tells us when to step forward and when to back away. We feel love when we speak the truth. When we are in our higher power's will, we naturally carry a message, and the message we need finds us. When we clear away the defects that block the passage, we can be a clearer channel for the love that surrounds us. We tap into a love that is greater than ourselves, and we find that we are able to do things that we never thought possible. Brilliance comes from us. We live with dignity, integrity, and grace, and we know we can always get better. That's why we stay. I was told that was the topic today. I've been asking about what's the topic? A couple of us. I just found that out. But that is why we stay. That's why I stay. So, again, I'm Chris. I'm an addict. My clean date is July 21st, 1993. I got a little story about that. So I got clean by the way of treatment, a nudge from the judge. I had did like a year stint in county jail for, I forget what, a bunch of stupid shit. And I got out, I'd been out about a month, and I was already running. And I had it going on because I lived in my mom's garage and I had a TV and a VCR in there. And I don't know about you guys, but I would stay up all night scheming and scamming about what I was going to do first thing in the morning to get more. My whole life was about ways of means to get more, the grips of addiction. And I lived in that for a long time. Anyway, I started my routine, and I had a girl in there living with me, and I was off. I'd leave in the morning, and I'd come back sometime in the afternoon, and I'd have enough for both of us. Well, a little for her, enough for me. And what happened was, while I was gone, one of the homies came over and brought me a pocket rocket and stuck it in my sock drawer. And, a gift. And while I was gone, my PO, I had a hardcore PO. He was like, wants me to come in UA once a week, and then he'd show up at my house a couple of times other than that. And, well, he showed up there and he found that in my sock drawer. I come pulling up and I see the state car parked out in front of my house, so I go down to the corner to someone else's house and I call it down there. I go, what's that car in front of my house? The girl says, it's your PO. He says he's going to wait it out till you come home. I said, well, he's going to be waiting a long time. And I didn't go home, but he left a card and left a message and said, I need to call him right away. So I called him the next day and he says, look, I'm violating you, you're going to go do your 6 years, or you can go to treatment. And I was like, all right, well, let me sleep on it. Because I knew how to do time. I didn't know nothing about treatment. I didn't even really know what it was. I just knew that people went in there and turned into legs and lost and Christians and stuff like that. It freaked me out. And it just so happened somebody who I was running with at the time had been through this treatment center. And he told me, you should give that a shot. And this comes somebody I was using with. And he said, I did it and it worked for me for a while. So just based on that information, I called him back and said, all right, I want to do this certain treatment center. My PO was a lady. He said, all right, well, get down there, go to the intake, and get a bed. And he said, I want you to get this sheet signed every time you go, because beds aren't available on day one. So intakes are every Monday and Wednesday at 7:30 in the morning. So I went to those intakes loaded every Monday and Wednesday, and they had a policy. Thinking back now, I don't know why I didn't figure it out then, but they had a policy that if you didn't have 3 days clean, you couldn't get in. And they would make you wait another 30 days to come back for intake. And my PO would lock me up if he knew that was happening. So they had a policy, if you were honest up front, say, look, I got loaded, I'm dirty. They wouldn't test you, they said, come back in 3 days. So I worked that hustle for about a month and a half. And I was going to see my PO, giving him the little card showing that I was there. And he wasn't testing me because he thought they were testing me, because there was no bed available. So about a month and a half in, he tells me, you go to intake this week, you don't get a bed, you can either turn yourself in or start running, because I'm not playing this game anymore. So Sunday night, I was using Sunday. I couldn't stop using. I wanted to do this thing, but I just couldn't do it. And this is where the story gets good. Sunday night, I got to be at intake Monday morning, 7:30, and I can't stop using. So what I did is I went to these apartments, that were shady apartments, where my son was living with my ex, and he was 7 years old. And I had to piss him off. I had the audacity to ask him, had he been smoking any weed? He was 7 years old. So at that point in my life, it was all about me. I didn't care about that. And I sort of saved my life. I used his urine to get into that treatment center on July 21st, 1993. I did one of the treatment centers where you stay there for 6 months. I was in-house 6 months, and then I did 3 months transitional living with the same people. And that treatment center introduced me to you guys. And thank God that they were the place that they made us go to meetings every day. They didn't care what meetings. By the way, I went to every fellowship that had A behind it, and I did it every day. I did it for a long time. And I didn't understand exactly what I was doing, but I knew I stayed clean. For 4 years, I stayed clean in Narcotics Anonymous and the other fellowship. But I didn't work the steps, and I didn't have a sponsor. I had a guy that I called him my sponsor, but he wasn't my sponsor, because we never did anything. Didn't even build a relationship, so. I wouldn't suggest that to anybody, because at the end of that 4 years, I acted out. Violently. I had made a commitment to myself and to God that those types of behaviors I wasn't going to do anymore. Because even in treatment and going to meetings, I heard you guys talking about how you were changing your lives and how these old behaviors didn't have a place in today's life. And so I was doing that on a white knuckle basis, right? No work behind it. And I acted out. And it scared the shit out of me, because I didn't want to be that guy anymore, and I definitely didn't want to hurt other people. And so what happened was, on that night, I called a good friend. I told him the bag of shit that I was in. He came and picked me up. We went to an NA meeting. He walked me up to this guy who I was really intimidated by, which was his sponsor, and he was making me sponsor. And that guy started teaching me the NA way that I still practice today. Everything he taught me, the basics around here, like was talked about last night, right? Work the steps, get a sponsor, be of service. And the other one big thing in there is find yourself a higher power, a God of your understanding. And that's probably the biggest thing for me today that works for me. So when I started working the steps, we got through one, through two, finding out all these things about myself that I didn't realize were going on since it was really young. And I'm still feeling that layer back, by the way. And I got to step 4, right? The step 4 was a scary one. And my sponsor made me read on it, reading from the basic text. I did work out of the step guide my first time through the steps. It was all guided from my sponsor from the basic text. And when I got to step 4, his advice to me was, I want you to just make a list. And I want you to write down your deepest, darkest, scariest shit that you think you're never going to tell anybody that you're taking to the grave. Just write it down. He goes, we're not at step 5. He goes, I want you to write this stuff down as if there was no step 5. And that's what the book talks about. So that's what I did, and I can tell you guys is I wept when I was writing my stuff. And after I wrote it, I knew that I was going to share it. I let go of all those inhibitions and fear and all that shit after I wrote it. And to me, that was that's first step 4 and step 5 was opening the door to the weight had got lifted off. And going through the rest of the steps and taking care of my side of the street on a lot of that stuff was, I wouldn't say easy, but it was a lot more comfortable than I thought it would be. And I made some mistakes. I tried to make some amends before I was in the amend process. So I'm from California. I told some guys, I'm from Fresno, California. If you've never heard of that, it's the armpits, right? In the middle of California. And it's not a good place to live or visit. But anyway, I was at my mom's house. I was on a weekend pass from the center, and this cat I used to run with and do all my dirt with come down the street with a shopping cart with a big ass TV in it. And he comes up to the door. He goes, "Hey man, I haven't seen you in a while." And he's the whole deal. He says, "You want to buy a TV?" And I had money in my pocket, you know what I mean? And it was a cool TV, but I already had enough on board to know I wasn't going to support his habit at that point. I said, "No man, I can't buy a TV." He got hot. You know, he started tripping. Well, it really got hot because I decided I'm going to make this amends to him. I wasn't even working the steps. I just knew about them. And I said, "Hey, you remember that time we did that caper and all that stuff was in your garage and it disappeared and you thought it was me that took it?" "Yeah." I said, "It was." And he snapped, dude. He just, that was a big mistake. And anyway, when you're doing your amends process, stay in the process. They're numbered for a reason. So, fast forward a little bit. I got the treatment, obviously. I worked for that treatment center for a couple of years after I graduated from there. And I continued to do Narcotics Anonymous as I've always done NA since I got clean. You know, when I got that sponsor, my first sponsor, one thing that he told me was, "I want you to find a fellowship and do it." So I didn't understand that at the time. You know, I've always identified as an addict, nothing else. That part I knew. And what he meant by that was, you get in the fellowship and you read the literature, you work the steps, you sponsor, you get sponsored, you do service around that. And what he told me was, if you're doing this one and that one and nobody really knows who you are, it's just watered down. You don't have no foundation. And he taught me that at 4 years clean. And so that's when I started doing NAs. And I'm an NA purist. That's all I do. If you see me at an AA meeting, it's because I'm celebrating somebody's birthday and I'm sitting listening. And I have mad respect for that fellowship because without them, there would be no us. So I had a year clean, just over a year, I met my wife. And we were going to a meeting that was a spiritual meeting that was not NA and it wasn't AA. And I had been going through this treatment center for quite a while, and I walked in, I don't know about you guys, but I walk in the rooms always, and I'd look around the room to see if I knew anyone from the streets. And I walked into this meeting, and I was walking through, and I heard somebody saying my name, and I turned around, and it was a girl. And I was on step 13 at that time. And so I turned around, and the girl said my name. And I didn't recognize her at first, and then she told me, "It's Shannon." And I used to use Shannon. So, by the way, I carried around like 4 or 5 pieces of paper in my pocket that had my phone number. I would hand those out. Here's my business card. That's how you do step 13. You don't do that. And so she called me, but we knew each other, and we got together a couple of times. If you let her tell the story, it'll sound a little different. There's a debate on that. Anyway, so her and I, we hit it off pretty good. It's funny because when we were using buddies and stuff, we never were intimate. We never had sex. We were just rubbed off, you know. And it's funny how that turned out. I would have never thought in a million years that one day this would be my life. So We ended up living together within a year. I broke some rules early on in that relationship. And, that was during that first 4 years. That was in that first 4 years. So I was not practicing principles based on what I know today. I was doing the best I could in white knuckling, staying clean, definitely did lots of meetings. And, I was doing the deal, it just wasn't doing the work. And we raised 6 kids, his, mine, and ours, she calls it. Because we got into a relationship, she had 3 and I had 2. And then we ended up having our daughter together, whose name's Serenity. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard that ever speaker reading before. Anyway, Serenity's our pride and joy, man. She's 26 years old today. The homeowner has 2 kids, and she's our youngest. So life's happening for me. Anyway, moving forward, when I married Shannon, I married her cousin Tim. Tim was one of us, and we slept on my couch for about 20 years off and on. And really a good dude. And it's a sad story because 2 years ago, Tim went home. I remember telling Tim on several occasions, I do not want to go to your funeral. He was a lot younger than me, 10 years younger than me. And that day came. The thing that comes from that is, I don't know how this is going to sound, but I got to officiate his celebration of life. I got to officiate my best friend's celebration of life. I've gotten to officiate bunches of weddings. I went online about 8-10 years ago, and I got ordained. That doesn't make me any better than anyone else. It just means I paid the fee and got ordained. But what it has given me is the ability to share love. I get to share people's lives on this one day, and that's why I do it, because it's all about love. And I've been blessed with that. When I got to do celebrations of life, it's a little different. It is still coming from a place of love, and I feel really honored and beside myself that people ask me to do that day. You know, I just did a friend's mother about a month ago, and again, I just get this feeling, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm going to tell you what, I wouldn't get to do any of that stuff if it wasn't for you guys. I love everything I know about what I do here. And so, I know I jumped way forward, but going back, man, Shannon and I have been married. We got married in April 10th, 1999. We're coming up on our 25th wedding anniversary next year. I know, those are huge milestones, right? I never even thought I'd be clean that long, let alone married. I never thought I'd ever get married. I was one of the guys that wanted to carry 5 pieces of paper in my pocket at all times. And I've been faithful to my wife every day of my marriage. And for anybody who hasn't, there's no judgment there. That's just for me. It comes with the principles that I'm practicing, right? Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, the 3 basic ones. Well, the last one, it was shared about last night, that willingness piece, that's the biggest one. If I'm not willing, the other 2 ain't going to come to pass anyhow. And, you know, we talk about the principles and the application of them. So, my first sponsor was Lynn G. in Fresno. He was my sponsor for 6 years. I'm going to jump around a little bit because I'm no circus speaker. And my story's long and it's muddy because I forget. You know, I have a hard time remembering what happened yesterday. But my second sponsor was Steve W. in Fresno, California. And I went to Steve just because of the spiritual program that he was working. I felt I needed to tap into that. I'm also the guy that went to church every Sunday from my first 5 or 6 years. I haven't been to church in quite some time. I come to find that church is wherever I go. It's in here. God's right here. I don't have to be in any specific building, having any specific person dictate to me how I have a relationship with God. I found that on my own. But I did a lot of research to get there. And then in 2008, you guys all know the bottom fell out of our economy. I had been working at the same job for 9 years, and they were shutting down the factory where I was at. And they offered me to transfer to Portland, Oregon, stay with the same company. And in the whole factory, I was the only one that took them up on it. Well, I went home and ran it by my wife, and she didn't bat an eye. She said, let's go. It was her call, really. She said, I ain't leaving my family and everybody, because, we're both born and raised in Fresno, California. And when she green-lighted it, a month later, we were packing our stuff and heading to Portland, well, Vancouver, Washington, actually. Luckily for me, the director at that plant I knew him, so he asked me, where are you moving to? I said, I'm looking at Beaverton. He goes, you want to live in Beaverton? You want to live in Vancouver? So I didn't know the area, so that's where I landed. That's where I live now. That's home. Vancouver's home. I don't think of California as home anymore. It's where I'm from. I still go there and visit. Like I said, it's not a nice place to visit. If it wasn't for family and friends, I wouldn't visit Fresno. So I landed in Vancouver, Washington, and I immediately, my sponsor from Fresno said, when you get there, find a sponsor and get a new sponsor. Because he knew that I needed tangible. I needed somebody right here to be accountable to me. And I did that. And Peter S. is my first sponsor. I looked for somebody with more clean time than me. It's not always easy to do when you start having years up. And I found Peter. I think Peter has a year more than I did, a year or two. And we worked great. We were working steps. We were having a good relationship. We did things together. And about less than 2 years into that, Peter decided he was going to move to Tri-Cities. And he called me, sat me down, we had a talk about it. He said, I'll still be your sponsor if that's what you choose. If you want to get a new sponsor, I understand. And at first I was like, no, Tri-Cities isn't that far. I could do that. And I marinated on that for a couple of weeks. And I talked to some of my support about it. And I came to the realization when I left California, I needed to get one tangible. And if he's in Tri-Cities, I'm not going to see him. So he understood. And then there was a guy named Martin C. who was sponsoring a bunch of people in my area. And he lived in Portland. So I went to Martin, and Martin started sponsoring me from that point. And Martin and I worked together for about the next 4 years, I want to say. And what happened is Martin retired and decided to move to Costa Rica. And I knew damn well I wasn't going to be participating with somebody who lived that far away. I still talk to Martin, but very rare. So here's where my story gets different about sponsorship. Martin still sponsors a bunch of guys that are in my tree. And one of the guys that he sponsors is Kyle Elum. And Kyle has something that I want in the way of Kyle's very assertive. He's cut and dry to the point about everything. And I'm not. I'm really easygoing. So I wanted some of that. I wanted him to teach me his way of doing things, because I can get something from everybody in this room. I want to remain teachable. And so there was only one caveat for me that hung me up for a minute, but I let it go because it's not important to me. What's important to me is that you're working a solid program, and that I want what you got, and that I think we can build a relationship and do this thing together. So I have 10 more years clean than my sponsor does. And that was a little bit of a hang-up at first when I was making that. I knew I wanted to have Kyle sponsor me. And I talked to Martin about it. Him and I both agreed that it's just time. His program speaks volumes. That's what I do. And today, Kyle and I and 14 other guys meet every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. for breakfast and work the steps every week. And that's just what we do. And a bunch of my sponsors are in there, and a bunch of his sponsors are in there. We all work together. And we build this intimate relationship through the process of working the steps. And we're actually, this is kind of crazy. We started out with this old school set somebody wrote in California. And we've been revising it every year ever since. And the questions are pretty, they're thinkers. That's good. Dave calls them wordy. Some of the questions are kind of wordy. But if you've never done a step study, you should try it out. Get together with some guys, get to know each other on a level that you may not, even though you've known them for a while, you may not know them. We've gotten pretty open in there. I wouldn't say everybody shares their deepest, darkest shit in there, but we've gotten pretty open. And it just continues to evolve. We've been doing, how long have we been doing it now, John? About 2-3 years? 4 years? 5 or 6? I don't know. Time gets away from me. It's been a while. Anyway, so getting back a little bit, so that's my sponsorship. So that Kyle's my current sponsor. Since I've got clean, I've done lots of H&I work, going into jails and treatment centers. I've also done PI work, going into schools. And so I was on a panel one time, me and another guy, sponsor, and there was like 4 of us. And we were in this treatment center, and we were sharing a message. And Jonathan right there was sitting in that treatment center, 12 years ago. And it was funny because I remember Jonathan from a few meetings. He'd always be in the back of the room like this. You better not say shit to me. And I remember when we went into that treatment center, I seen him sitting back there. I recognized him. And he came up to us after the panel and shook our hands and said, thank you for coming to me. I think it was a week or 2 later, we were at our home group. My home group's the men's house in Vancouver, Washington. If you're in Vancouver, Washington, you should come to the men's house Wednesday night at 7. I don't get to frequent it like I used to because I work swing shift now. But it's a great meeting. It's a really solid meeting. Solid recovery there. And a bunch of good guys that do what we do. They welcome the newcomer. They make sure the newcomer has what they want, a book, whatever it is, phone numbers. We make sure it happens there. And anyway, I was at that meeting. Jonathan come walking towards one of my sponsees who was having a bad night that night. I'm going to tell the story the way Jonathan tells it. And I was his second choice. He came to me and asked me if I was sponsored. I can tell you, in all my years clean, I've had, I don't know how many sponsors. Most of them didn't do any work. But there are, once in a while, you get one who just comes into your life for a lifetime, not just a season. And that's Jonathan. We have, we've done everything together. You know? I was best man. He's the only wedding I didn't officiate. I was the best man at that one. Jonathan works his steps. He does. I'm going to tell you what, if I had every sponsor like Jonathan, I could only have like 1 or 2 because they'd keep me too busy, you know. When I sponsor guys nowadays, we do a thing in our area. I don't know if you guys do it, but we go, if you were able to sponsor somebody, raise your hand. I used to do that. I quit doing that because I ended up with 50 sponsors, and that's not fair to me, and it's not fair to them. It's physically impossible for me to sponsor that many guys. All I'm looking there is my ego. It's no good. So I need to be available for those relationships when I commit to them. So I don't raise my hand for that stuff, and I still get asked. And, not always, not as often as I did before. And I look at that as if somebody's going to put themselves in a vulnerable position to ask that question, I need to give them a real answer, and I need to be ready to commit to whatever that looks like. So I do my best to do that. And I got to tell you, I'm not as available as I used to be, man. Work, family, there's a lot going on in my life. So I take this stuff real seriously because you know what? Somebody gave that to me, and they were available for me. The best thing I could do is pass that on and give it back. They said you only keep what you have by giving it away. And I think the quality of that is more important than the quantity. So yeah, I think, I don't know how many sponsors I got right now. Most of them aren't doing anything. Or they're in that step study group and we meet every week and we work steps together every week. And that's one of the best things I've ever done is get into that group and do what we're doing. Besides my first round of steps with my first sponsor. And that was, I was just cleaning up all this mess that I was still standing in. Now the mess is, there's still some mess, it's just a lot of this mess. I do have one sponsee story I want to share about. It's a retreat related story. And so I sponsored this little guy, his name was Alex. And this was about 10 years ago. It was in Washington. He came from California and my wife started becoming friends with his wife because they were meeting at this meeting and they had a bunch of time playing. Well, she did. My wife said, you gotta meet her husband, they're really cool people. Well, I met her husband. The night I met him, he was inebriated on paying bills. He couldn't even hardly walk. And we were outside of a meeting, and me and another guy put him under our arm and carried him into the meeting and sat him down. But you don't have to come to the meeting clean. We suggest it, but you don't have to. If you got a desire to sit in that seat, we'll get you to it. And we did. And as a result of that act of kindness that me and the other guy gave to him, he asked me if I would sponsor him. And I said, yeah. I said, if I'm a sponsor, you need to get clean. That's the first thing we got to do here is get clean. He was no stranger. He had 20 years clean when he got loaded. And so I started sponsoring Alex. We started working the steps, and our step work got deep. This guy he was bearing his soul to me, and it was real emotional on a lot of occasions. And so after about 6 months clean, I guess it was, and we were having our men's retreat in Miller, Savannah, Washington. And I said, say, man, I want you to come to this retreat. And he wasn't big on people. He wasn't big on retreats. He barely could sit in a meeting with 20 guys and feel sin on his hands. And so he agreed because I told him, this is going to be good for you. You're opening up. So on the ride to that retreat, it's 100 miles one way. And on the ride to the retreat, it's just Alex and I learned more about Alex in that ride than I had from the previous time working steps with him. I learned that he was adopted that day. He never talked about it in his step work. He revealed to me that day that he was coming to a relationship with a higher power. He had throughout his step work, he had a real problem with the God concept. He couldn't get past it. In fact, that's why he got it. And I, on the other hand, me and God are cool. And God have a good relationship. So he wanted, like I looked for Kyle with assertiveness, he was looking for how to find a relationship with a higher power through me. And we talked a lot about it. I never told him what direction to go on that, how to do it. I just told him what I do, and the rest was up to him. And so he had told me on that car ride, he goes, you know what? I'm getting my relationship with a higher power. I feel at peace. He just revealed all this stuff to me on this car ride, right? And it was a trick. It was a real God shot. And it made me feel good. I was like going to this retreat like this feeling I got is awesome. This is going to be great. Right? So we get to the retreat, man, everything's going good. And this retreat, they have a man-made lake. It's beautiful. And a bunch of guys go out there and they get canoes and we go out there and tip each other over and act like fools and do shit we ain't supposed to be doing. And we're just chopping it up, having fun. I said, hey man, you want to go swimming? And he goes, yeah. Alex was a little guy. He's like 5'6" and about 130 pounds. And so, yeah, we get our swimming trunks on, go out to the lake, and a bunch of the guys, I know all the guys out there playing and chopping up, cutting, having fun. We go out there, and we don't swim out 40 yards, 30 yards. It's actually a buoyed off swimming area. We swam just to the other side of the buoy about 6 feet. just right on the other side of it, because that's where all the guys on the canoes are, tipping the fuckers and having a good time. Splashing, and we're out there probably 20, 30 minutes, and Alex turns to me and says, hey, man, I'm going to go back in and get tired. He's a little guy. I was like, oh, man, are you good? Is everything good? He goes, yeah, I'm good. I'm just going to go back in. I said, all right. I mean, I could turn around and see the shore. It's right there where the bushes are, you know? All right, cool. And I turned around and continued yucking it up and having a good time. And after about 20 or 30 more minutes, I'm getting tired too. So me and one of the other guys, we go in, and I noticed Alex's cigarette pack in his Zippo lighter sitting on the picnic table by the water. And there's a dude sitting there, and I go, hey man, you see a little guy walk by here? That's his stuff right there. He came out like half hour ago. He goes, you see my buddy? Weird. So I grabbed this shit and I went back to the cabin. His clothes were folded right where we folded them, and we put on our swim trunks and shit. And then my wheels started spinning pretty good. And I was like, what's going on here? And I went to the guy, the chair of the retreat, and I said, hey man, look, I'm missing a little guy. Nobody knew him. That was the other thing. He was pretty new, and a lot of people didn't know him. And I went to Mike and I said, hey look, I'm missing a little guy. He's little, and he went in the water with me. It's the last place I've seen him. I said, we need to start looking for him right now. I can tell you there was 160 guys at that retreat, and within 5 minutes, that whole place was scattered out searching for this dude. We were everywhere. And all I could think was, I'm responsible for this guy. I brought him here. And eventually, me and another guy got in the canoe, went out on the water. There was nobody in the water, so the water was still, and we looked down, and there he was in the bottom of the lake. And we drug him out, tried to give him CPR. He'd been under there like an hour. He was gone. And I was so freaked out. I can't even remember the words. But it was horrible. All I could think was, I gotta tell his wife, you know. And I was so worried that somebody was gonna go call his wife and tell her before I could, and that's exactly what happened. And that piece fucked me up because I felt responsible. And my sponsor today, Kyle, who wasn't my sponsor at the time, grabbed me because I was flipping out. And he said, you are not God. Man, that was heavy. Even though in my mind I wasn't thinking I was God, I was trying to act like it, right? Because I wanted to control this fucking situation that was way out of control. And that put it into perspective. It took me a minute to soak that in, but it calmed me down. His wife, it's a men's retreat. There's never been women at this retreat. In the next hour and a half, there was half a dozen women there. And his wife was one of them. I followed her to the morgue, and we took him there in Olympia. And I just told her, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And she said, it ain't your fault. And we were standing over the lake looking at it. And the moon's coming down. We had to have been there. And God showed her. And she goes, look over that lake. And I said, yeah, it's beautiful. And she goes, that was the last place he was. That's pretty serene. She goes, I'm good with it. He had been struggling with drugs for, well, all his life. But after his relapse, it's been a couple of years. But he finally was at peace. And he told me that before that happened. So I don't know where you're at with God in your life, but you experience stuff like that, you know there's God. And I have one more experience and I'll shut up. I want everyone here to remember, this is just my interpretation of how it works. It might be different for you. It might be a whole different set of things. I'm just one individual who's lived a program of spiritual principle. Martin told me the practical application of spiritual principles. What that means is, I'm going to still fuck up, but I'm going to try to fix it in a real hurry. That's how I live. Most of my dilemma is right here. It doesn't come out here as much anymore. It definitely doesn't come out here at all. I'm too old. I'll probably get hurt if I try doing that shit. So, just because it isn't outward, sometimes the inward shit is tough to deal with too, And so spiritual principles that being practically applied have to start here. So another awakening that I had. By the way, if you didn't recognize that, that was a major spiritual awakening for me. And I've had many. The other one revolves around death too. It was my mother. When I left California, I spent my last night with my mother, me and my daughter. My daughter was 12 at the time, and it was a sad goodbye, man. My mom sat there and cried, and she said, "I don't want you to go." And I said, "You can go with me. You can come live with me. Don't worry about nothing." But she was old school. She said, "I don't need here. I ain't in my house. I'm not because that's my life here." And I get it. I said, "But I gotta go." And I did. It was hard. It was hard. You know. I guess I'm kind of a mama's boy. I mean, my mom and dad divorced when I was 7 years old, so I lived with my mom my whole life. I was a fucking hellion. I don't know how the fuck she ever dealt with me. But anyway, that's probably why she was so mean. But anyway, I came to Washington, living my life. I left there on Super Bowl Sunday. I believe it was February 9th of 2009. Super Bowl Sunday, the Steelers were playing the Cardinals. The Cardinals blew it. They couldn't win that game. I watched the second half in a motel room in Grants Pass. That's where we spent the night on the way to Washington. Anyway, this is that story. Almost a year to the day later, on February 23rd, I was at work and got a phone call from my brother. And he said, "Mom went to the hospital. You should probably get it that way." And what does that mean? I said, "Was she conscious?" And he said, "Yeah, she was conscious, but she was totally unaware of what's going on." I was broke at the time. I got here in 2009, went to work and got laid off after a month. I was doing odd jobs for my landlord, and luckily I was doing that. I called in a favor from him, and he gave me some money. I got a plane ticket, and I shot down to Fresno the next day. When I got to Fresno, my mom was in the hospital. She was unconscious. I never got to speak to my mother again. I can tell you the year that I was here, when I would talk to her on the phone, our phone calls were very not great. She was unhappy that I was gone. And we didn't have a lot of good conversations that year. We talked probably once a month, and it was, like I said, she had some animosity about her being gone, and I get it. But I got showed up to that hospital room, and I held her hand, and I sat with her till the 25th. It's the day she died. And what happened was a whole bunch of family. That room was filled with family. And my other brother lives on the East Coast. He met me there. My other brother lives there. And the doctor told us that your mother is not going to come out of this, and she can either live on that machine for the rest of her life and somewhere in Southern California, or you can unplug her and you can let life take its course. I didn't make that decision on my own. My brothers and I together made that decision. My mother was only 60 years old. She was obese her whole life. She was a chain smoker. She had pulmonary disease, and that's what eventually took her life. And so, here I was. By the way, like I said before, I was a hellion. I stole from my mom. I fucking made her grow gray hair before it was her time. I mean, I was the oldest of 3 boys. She had 3 boys. We would all beat each other up and shit all the time. And I was just, yeah. Most of you guys know how that goes. And in and out of jails. I went in one time when I got out, there was bars on the house. All the windows and doors had bars on them. And I got told, those are for you. Not for the stranger that might break in the house. For the one we know will break in the house. And I remember that shit hurt my feelings, but today I get it. I get it. And so here my mom passes away, man. I'm the executor of her estate. It wasn't much of an estate. It was a debt. But I was the one given the responsibility to handle everything. That same guy that had bars put on the window, you guys did that for me. And I was scared shitless. I was like, I have no fucking idea what to do. You know, I'm going to handle all this business. I don't even know where to start. And my brother goes, she has a file cabinet in the office. She said, if you ever need to, go into there. All right, well, that's a start. I pull open the file cabinet drawer. There's an envelope sticking up and it says, Chris, read this. My mom was a bookkeeper by trade, and she left me meticulous step-by-step notes on what to do. From the deathbed, she told me what to do. And it all went smooth. It was, I had a major awakening about how life happens through the process of death, and how I was able to understand more about how the life cycle happens. Right? And ever since then, it's weird how somebody will pass and a baby will be born like within days. I've started to recognize this cycle that goes on, you know? And it's making me more aware of my mortality and also less afraid of it. But I don't know about you. I don't want to die. That's why I'm in here. But if I do, and when I do, because I know none of us gets out alive, I just want to go clean and leave a good legacy for my kids, the people behind me. And it talks about that in the literature. And so, yeah, I've got all them kids, man. One last little thing I'm going to share, because I was just in Fresno last weekend. And so, we've got 1, 2, 3, Lindsay, Shauna, 4 girls, 2 boys. Very, very, a lot of damage gone on in the family dynamic. I'm going to share something in here that I've never shared in a group, but I have shared this death study. Apparently, we were all living in that little house at one time. My oldest son, who was 8 at the time, and her son, who was 5, I think, at the time, or 6. They're a few years apart. My son was molesting her son. We didn't find this out until 10 years after the fact. They were already adults. For whatever reason, one day her son, I was gone, her son sat her down and told her this, what was going on. I want to tell you, I still love both my sons. I can tell you the younger one doesn't speak to us. I don't know why. We were unaware of any of this. We were blown out of the water when we were told this story. And I went directly to my older son, and I confronted him. And of course, he denies it to this day. And all I've ever told him is, man, just get honest so we can get the healing going, so we can start healing. My wife will not talk to my older son. She will not have anything to do with him. I have 2 beautiful grandchildren from him, and I'm all about it. I'm all about those kids. And it's a struggle for me in my life when it comes to my issue. I said, hey, the kids didn't do it. It ain't their fault. I'm going to take that to the grave. Those kids of mine, I don't give a shit what happened. They were kids. But until he gets honest with his end of it, it's going to be what it is. I can't control it. I've learned that things out of my control are what they are. All I can do is play the best role in that situation that I can. And I love them both. Even though the kid won't talk to me, if he showed up to my door right now and said, can I come in? I'd say, absolutely, you can come in. This is your house. He's been a shit to my wife. That's the only resentment I have, is how my wife gets treated from him, because she didn't do it. Anyway, that's a hard dynamic to deal with. Maybe somebody in here has some similar in their life. Most of my kids are addicts. It's hard for me because they were all kids when I got clean. My son was 7 when I got clean. He's the oldest. So most of them haven't really seen a whole lot of, our oldest daughter, she still blames all her shit on us. I gotta tell you guys something. I grew up, my mom was like a drill sergeant. She was no joke. When my mom screamed, my ears almost burned off of my head. My mom could scream the best of them. And she was a single mom with 3 boys, so she had to do what she had to do. She was mean as fuck. I think a lot of my issues stem from when I was little, growing up in that kind of environment. Things were different back then, right? You know, I'd go to the store with a note to get cigarettes from my mom, and then I figured out I could take that same note and get them for myself, right? Grandpa, go to the ice chest, get me a beer, get a drink. I started doing that shit when I was a little kid. Now, having said all that, at some point in my life, I have to take responsibility for my own shit. I can't keep blaming it on all those people that taught me shit at an early age. Yes, I was damaged. I'm damaged goods. But you know what? There's a solution, and I choose to be in it. And I choose not to keep pointing my finger at where it started. That shit's irrelevant now. Who gives a shit who started the fire? Who's going to fucking put it out? So my oldest daughter hasn't figured that out yet. I keep trying to tell her, hey, you can keep blaming us for your shit. You're the one that's miserable, not us. Well, we kind of are, because she makes us that way. So anyways, man, I got a million more stories just like the ones I just told you, and I'd love to tell them. There's another person here that wants to come up here and tell theirs. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to show you guys what NA has done for me. And it ain't just NA, right? NA is all about, so we got the fellowship, this right here. I call this the gravy. This is the gravy. The meat and potatoes, then the sauce. Right? So I get to have this whole meal. But I only know how to do this because you guys taught me how. Continue to teach me how, really. As long as I keep that mindset, I don't have all this together yet. And the day I get to get that infinity coin and leave that legacy for my kids and those behind me, that's when I got it. Thanks, Uncle.